Welcome to the big speech. This is still our fake speech segment. We got Ross, Mike, Matt, and Landon here. Our selector of the speech this evening is Ross.
All right. Thanks for welcoming me, Landon. Before we jump in, I would just like to welcome everybody with a quick shout out. So we're here with Mike Pippin Schaefer.
Love Lord of the Rings. Love every single movie.
We got Landon Mary Free.
Sure.
And we got Matt Treebeard Schultz.
What up? What up? I had to make up for being named Charles last week after Charles Barkley, I assume.
We've gone over this, Matt. Charles Schultz, the cartoonist you were named after. Hey, Matt, despite not bringing headphones or a microphone to this, what did you bring to the show tonight that will be...
Am I allowed to talk about this on the show?
I don't think anyone's going to hear it until after the fact.
Well, I've got one of these. And for those of you who are not watching the live stream cast of the show, one of these is a gorgeous diamond ring, 3-stone diamond ring on 14 karat yellow gold with a white gold like center thingy underneath the stones.
Ooh, a center thingy.
Oh yeah, center thingies. They're all the rage these days. But yeah, so I will be proposing to my girl, Claire, this weekend.
This weekend?
Yeah, like in 2 days.
Whoa.
It's happening.
For those of our listeners, Matt, he's been on the prowl for a while. We've all watched him grow up in many ways. We've seen him fail many ways. We've seen him borrow cars on dates. And this is a big step for him. So we're all rooting for him.
Really,
Hope he says yes.
The last step.
Thanks for that. Yeah, thanks for that flattering intro, Mike.
Don't worry. If she says no, we will just cut this out.
Good.
So, is there any theme of engagement to tie back into our topic this evening? Any bread?
Well,
I couldn't think of a more engaging story than Lord of the Rings.
all right, I'll take it off from here. All right, so I'm the speech picker tonight. This is Ross speaking. So I went with the selection, one of Sam's speeches in Lord of the Rings. So for people that want specifics, it's the second movie, and it's a dialogue between Frodo and Sam. You guys, should I read it, or should we expect that the listeners have heard it?
Read it.
Go for it. Okay, so we start. Oh, all right. So we start with Frodo here. A quick line. I can't do this, Sam. Sam's response. I know, it's all wrong. By rights, we shouldn't even be here, but we are. It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were, and sometimes you didn't want to know the end. Because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come, and when the sun shines, it will shine out the clearer. Those were the stories that stayed with you. That meant something, even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I know now. Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, but only they didn't. They kept going, because they were holding on to something. Frodo's response. What are we holding on to, Sam? And Sam replies, that there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for. And that's your speech. Okay, so before we jump too much into the speech, I'll just give you guys a quick blurb on why I picked it. So, first things first, I've always loved The Lord of the Rings. I read the books in high school, I liked them. I watched the movies, I liked them. And then later on in college, I read the books again, and I read a book about the books, and just kind of got a little bit more into Tolkien and why he wrote the books and some of the symbolism, if you will, in the books. And the deeper in I went, the more I loved reading them. I think when I first looked at them, it was pretty. When I first started reading them in high school, it was pretty much just I liked the adventure, the epicness, the quest, the fighting. I mean, kind of what a lot of high school guys are probably drawn to, kind of a superficial level, just like you'd like a lot of superhero movies. Um, but I think that, like I said, when I went in college, I just got a lot more into the depth of the Lord of the Rings. And what separates, I think, Lord of the Rings from a lot of just superhero movies is the fact that how much I think is Tolkien and how good of a writer he was and how much depth there's in the books and how much you can draw from the books about life. And they're not just, it's a lot different from just watching the Avengers and 2 hours of explosions and then it's over. There's a lot more to it than that. So, um, anyway, so once we started doing this fake speak segment, I really wanted to do something from Lord of the Rings. Why this particular speech in a movie or books with probably lots of them? Why another reason I really like the Lord of the Rings is who the heroes are. So if you look at the Avengers, it's Robert Downey Jr. and Iron Man and this rich guy that can fly, or it's Captain America that got this, I don't even know, secret, something that made him really fast and strong and good looking, or it's some other superhero that can do things that we just couldn't. So it's kind of, we're looking at these impossible figures that can't really be us. Where if you look at the Lord of the Rings, I think, again, my younger version of myself that just looked at them superficially, right, you got Aragorn who can fight with the sword and Legolas who can do all these cool things with the bow and all these sweet things. But in reality, the heroes in the Lord of the Rings are the hobbits, the nobodies. They're small, they're boring, they can't do anything, they can't fight as well as the other ones. They're kind of like, again, the nobodies. And I think that that really speaks a lot to the story is that the real heroes aren't these people that none of us could actually be. They're just the regular average Joe guys just like us. So
So I have a question for Ross and everyone. Um, so qualifier here. I have if I've seen the Lord of the Rings films, I don't remember enough of them to like remember every single thing about them. But I'm aware of and I can appreciate the things that Ross is talking about here, where they are bringing home the pertinence of this idea of the hero being the one who endures through the challenges day after day. It's the small person, et cetera, et cetera. And, of course, it's going to come up at some point. So hopefully this is a good enough point here. Of course, Tolkien was strongly influenced by his Catholic faith, and there's different elements of the stories which borrow from Catholicism or Christianity in general here. So coming back now to the question here, Rossi kind of made the comparison between the Lord of the Rings being something attractive to people, similar to Avengers in the sense that they're attractive, but different in the sense of how they are attractive. So, you know, as our culture becomes, not to be too dramatic here, but just simply becomes less Christian, is it surprising that at least 20 years ago when these still came out, that they are as attractive to people as they are? And does that say something about the legitimacy of the Christian story itself? What do you guys think about that?
I mean, I
Like, is
guess
that Christian? Is it that obvious?
so. I mean, I think that's your question. I think somewhat answers Mike's question.
Yeah.
Answers Mike's question a little bit. Tolkien was, again, he was a really good writer. So he wrote about kind of these, and I would argue kind of these basic universal, realities or truths about just the human experience and put them in a fictional story. But they're the fact that they're these kind of universal things, it's kind of these things that everyone shares or has in common. I think everyone's going to identify with it, at least in a little bit of a way. And then to kind of be a little bit more maybe direct answer is the way Tolkien wrote in contrast to, say, C.S. Lewis, who was a good friend of his. So if someone reads the Chronicles of Narnia, which is Lewis's kind of masterpiece of fiction, it's very obvious. So right in the Chronicles of Narnia, you have Aslan. This lion is very clearly the Jesus figure, and you can kind of go on and on and on, and it's more of a direct analogy where Tolkien didn't write that way. He wrote in a more subtle kind of I guess I would kind of say through the layers way. So it's not quite as easily perceived on the surface, which is why I think if you just watch it once without giving it too much thought, yep, it's an entertaining action movie just like the Avengers. But if you're really willing to, give it the time or the discussion or the thought, you really see how much is kind of below the surface.
I'd really wish that we had like an atheist or someone on the show just to learn, an atheist who loves Lord of the Rings or something, and just simply learn, like, and I'm sure that they're aware. I mean, atheists aren't stupid or anything. They're culturally aware. Like, just with the knowledge, having the knowledge that these stories are influenced significantly by different elements, very specific elements of Catholicism and or Christianity in general. Like, how do you respond to that? Like, just what are kind of your immediate thoughts? Is it I don't care, whatever, or like, yeah, I don't know. I can hardly kind of conjecture what they might say there.
I might suggest that the atheist would respond by especially just given, so like certainly J.R. Tolkien has this background as a Christian, um, but he also has a background as a philologist and someone who's deeply influenced by like what's the word I'm looking for? Like just mythology in general, I suppose. Um, so I would say the atheist would probably see this as another myth as one myth amongst many others, including Christianity. You know what I mean? So they kind of see Christianity as just basically, Christianity, Norse mythology, Greek mythology, you know, African mythology, whatever it is. I kind of see, I would imagine they'd kind of see this all in the same light, and that like there are universal human truths. I don't know. I would really have a hard time finding someone who would disagree with that. That there isn't something universal. Um, but yeah,
Yeah,
I guess that's how they would say.
that's an interesting. So I'm kind of like thinking things through as you kind of talk through some good points there. Yeah, I think that's a pretty legitimate argument for what just any average thinking atheist might say. Um, let's make a group reminder to ourselves here to look at a few of the very specific Catholic or Christian allusions in the book. But to kind of finish out my thought here, when we say myth, obviously they vary tremendously. I mean, just a few that come to the top of my mind. You have the one of well, who is the Roman god? She goes to like hell or something, and that's what winter is, right?
Aphrodite
Aphrodite. You have
or Persephone. I can't remember, one of the two.
yeah, you have, I don't know who else, right? You have all these myths. And the point is, they vary, of course, somewhat, but of course, they are similar, right? Because they are similar in the sense that there's heroes, there's love, there's true love, there's not true love, there's lust, there's all these different common strands that kind of converge in somewhat specific ways on, what it means to be a good human, right? And the point is, it's just an interesting idea. And I'm sort of reminded of C.S. Lewis, what he wrote in the book Mere Christianity, where he says something to the effect of God gave all of these non-Christian cultures good dreams, quote unquote, to describe this idea that these different elements of Christianity were sort of like trained in non-Christian cultures and all the different generations and well, not eons, but generations before Christ came. And so that, we might sort of better understand who Christ is and what his message is, so that it has kind of better context, if you will. So that was a big line I just gave here. But again, I said that So we're sort of talking in generalities here, but can anyone share like any of the specific Catholic or Christian elements of the stories which Tolkien sort of crafted in order to bring home certain themes or ideas?
Yeah, I guess I can jump in quick with a couple things. I mean, but so kind of an interesting one that you have Gandalf and you have Frodo, three of the most recognizable characters. So kind of to speak to my point earlier about how it's not obvious. So as in comparison to a Chronicles of Narnia, where Aslan is clearly the symbol for Christ or God. Tolkien's a little bit more in depth than that. So in Christian theology, you have Christ as priest, prophet, and king. So if you look at these three of the main heroes of the book, they each represent one aspect of that. So you have Aragorn is the heir to the throne, um, and he kind of has to the line of kings has been lost, and similar to after David before Christ, right? The line is kind of lost, and then we have Aragorn emerge as the king, and you have Gandalf, who's a person literally sent from. I mean, you could say God, or and it's in the film, or in the books, it's like, I mean, again, it's not directly just, it doesn't say God, but is sent to kind of teach people, and he's the prophet figure. He's even this old guy with the beard and a staff, right? And then you have, and especially reading, think about the Old Testament and Christianity, you have the idea of the priest who offers sacrifices for the people, and that's what Frodo is doing. He's offering the sacrifice. And like Christ, until the very end, it seems as he's literally offering himself. As so again, it's not, you would not watch that movie and think, oh my gosh, that's the priest, prophet, and king from the three of these kind of identities that Christ may have in Christian theology, but that influenced those characters and their roles in the story. So again, it's not obvious. It doesn't jump out and scream at you like maybe another book, other writers might, but I guess that's just one example of something that has an influence in the books from his background, religious background.
Something
Yeah.
else, something else that I've heard is a very Christian theme is just the nature of the ring itself. So like I've heard people kind of say the ring is almost analogous to sin in that it kind of possesses you, it weighs you down, it changes who you are fundamentally, right? So you have Gollum, who starts out as a hobbit of sorts, and because he's so possessed and taken by the ring, he ends up this kind of unrecognizable creature who's pretty despicable, I suppose. Um, and because of the ring makes you invisible, so I think there's some interesting symbolism there, in terms of like shame and sin and things like that. And then you basically Frodo, so one of the Christ figures who's making the sacrifice, right? So his whole mission is to destroy the ring, and kind of carry the burden of sin or the ring, back where it came from, and destroy it permanently. So that's another kind of very Christian theme of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I mean it's fun and it's interesting to hear you guys talk through each of these roles. I'm reminded of one of the classes I taught this year, and I wish I were more keenly aware of these Christ being represented in these three distinct ways, and Frodo and Gandalf and Aragorn, and because
Wait. You taught a class about Lord of the Rings and you didn't know these three things?
I mean, I've heard. No. I did not. Jabot does not offer classes on Lord of the Rings. No, what I was doing, I was teaching something about priest, prophet, king. Okay, and how we're all baptized. Those
Right.
three. Okay, and so I wish I'd known, because the point is, you know, we can hear. Imagine if you're just reading the catechism, right? You hear that you're baptized, priest, prophet, king. It can come off very abstract, right? And it can come off like irrelevant, or et cetera, et cetera. But of course, when you hear these stories, you know, you see the characters acting in very human, complex ways, and it helps you see more clearly, how each of those three roles, priest, prophet, king, are important elements to kind of have in a society, I mean, that, or a community, right? At one point or another, at least. So yeah, just something interesting to think about.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's cool. And I actually had one other thing, I guess, but before I get too much into this speech, I guess I give you a quick blurb on why I chose it. But Matt, can you give us, or somebody, I guess, whoever knows, Matt seems to be more of another Lord of the Rings fan, a little, like, just explain a little about Tolkien's back, not just the, okay, we know he had this religious symbols, but his life and why he, like, how he got to this point.
I think Mike knows a little bit more about his life. Let's
Say-
hand it over to Mike.
I wasn't gonna whatever, but yeah, I did in fact do some research on Tolkien here. Um yeah, writer, poet, soldier, Oxford professor, and philologist. That's a big word that
Which one do you think is coolest of that list?
I mean, of course, philologist. I mean, until Treebeard used that word earlier in the podcast, many people, of course, have never heard the word philologist. But in addition to being kind of a teacher or student of language as a philologist, you're also a student and teacher of symbols. Okay, so that's what philologist means. Boy, if you read the Wikipedia page on Tolkien, you're going to be sitting there for a couple of hours, which is exactly what I did because I'm all about this podcast. So, but here's the abbreviated version for the sake of brevity here. Did not grow up Catholic. His parents brought him up Baptist here. His mom is the one who converted to Catholicism. And this was a big event in his life in many ways because her conversion resulted in her family being cut off financially because, there's a lot of anti-Catholicism back in the day. Tolkien recalled his mother this way.
Is this England?
Yeah, we're in England here. We're in England.
England.
His mother died of type 1 diabetes at age 24, which was fairly common back then because that was just the age you tend to die for untreated diabetes. Tolkien says, "My own dear mother was a martyr indeed, and it is not to everybody that God grants too easy a way to his great gifts as he did to Hilary and myself, giving us a mother who killed herself with labor and trouble to ensure us keeping the faith." All right, so I believe I said too easy, but that should have been so easy. Regardless, Tolkien certainly admired his mother in a very deep and sincere and moving way. Of course, his mother ultimately left him and his brother to be raised by a gentleman named Father Francis Morgan. Um, Great upbringing by him, apparently learning the values of charity and forgiveness is what Tolkien remarked. He had a particular summer vacation in Switzerland in 1911. Kind of imagine a really long backpacking trip, but it's this particular trip that kind of provided the inspiration for the formats of Lord of the Rings. Romance in his life is sort of similar to the story of C.S. Lewis and Joy Davidson, in the fact that just this really striking marriage that people talked about in very positive and real ways. A few fun facts for this. He met his future wife at age 16, Edith. Had great fun with her, chasing her around the merry-go-rounds, this and that. But his guardian, Father Francis, didn't exactly say no to Edith, but he thought that Tolkien was way too young. And he wasn't exactly too keen on the fact that she was Protestant. All right. So he said, "You can date Edith or court Edith again when you're 21." That's 5 years Tolkien had to wait. And he waited those 5 years. They were both, well, he turned 21. He found Edith. Edith was engaged. He convinced her to break off the engagement. The rest is history. Um, Fun fact, enlisted as a code breaker for Britain in World War II because of his profound language, training in language. He did some training, ultimately wasn't required. I'm going to finish off my bit here on what is inscribed on him and Edith's tombstone. Does anyone know what is inscribed on their tombstone first? The names Luthien and Baron. These are two names from Middle Earth. One of the portions of the legendarium of Tolkien. Just this broad, we use the term Marvel Universe for all of these stories that take place within the Marvel Universe. Characters are all acting in the same space. The legendarium is the academic term for the space of Lord of the Rings and all the adjoining stories. So the creation myth of the Lord of the Rings legendarium involves this woman, Luthien, who was the most beautiful of all the children of Ilúvatar. She forsook her immortality for the love of the mortal warrior Beren. Okay, so that's just kind of a brief review of the love life of Tolkien, the faith life of Tolkien, and just some events that ended up shaping him in his life.
Yeah, I got something to kind of bounce off of that I feel like flows well with. I didn't mention it earlier, but probably the biggest reason why I think I chose the speech. To tie it in my own life a little bit. So
Is it
now
the
that we
good
know,
part? Is this what I think you're gonna say? Like the
um,
best part of how like these stories got served up?
I don't think so.
All right, keep going, keep going.
We'll see.
It's better than that.
So Mike alluded several things. So Tolkien was a pretty interesting guy, right? So he's a very intelligent guy. He's an Oxford professor. He's clearly an academic, wrote lots of books, intelligent. He has this strong faith life. So that's he's a religious man, kind of an interesting man. But then he also has these really interesting life experiences. He fights in World War I, something that none of us could probably actually relate to. He trained as a code breaker for World War II, and had to live through all of that. So he's kind of got this, and then you throw on top of all that, now he has this beautiful love story where he had to wait for this woman, and then there's this kind of struggle to get her back, and then they have this great marriage, and he just this tombstone, this beautiful poetic thing he's written. So overall point, just a really kind of romantic life. Soldier, fought in World War One, great love life, got the girl, really smart guy, got to teach at one of the most prestigious colleges in the world. So long story short, he's just a really interesting, cool, a cool guy. And yet at the same time, he lives like he kind of chose to live in, I guess, I don't want to say it's a too negative a way, but boring old England, just kind of stayed home, didn't go anywhere and move away, sipping tea, right? Kind of stereotype there. We'll let it go. But so he kind of has this a little bit of a combination of romance, romantic life, and yet still very ordinary. And that's why I think is so cool about Lord of the Rings is this high epic novel with these stories and these heroes and all these things that we look at as these beautiful things, and yet the heroes are the hobbits. And what is interesting is Sam giving this speech, he's definitely looking to hope, right? He's looking to hope. He's creating a very hopeful look to the future in the midst of trying time, and yet all Sam wanted to do was go back to the Shire, the most simple, ordinary, domestic place in Middle Earth. That's what he wanted the most. And I think that's to tie it into my life a little bit for people that are listeners that don't know me. So married, 3 kids. Um, so right, 10 years ago, I'm in college, and just like most people look into the future, dreaming, romance. What am I going to do? I'm going to climb these mountains. I'm going to get these jobs. I'm going to do these great things. And yet right now, I'm kind of, not that I didn't picture my life this way or that I'm unhappy, but I'm living a very ordinary domestic life. So kind of how to tie those two things together, I think, is something that Tolkien did beautifully. And I would imagine, right, the whole idea of, not that I'm in a, that what I described, I think, is different than like a midlife crisis, I guess, but just this idea of, you know, if we kind of have these big dreams, but maybe that's not what's really going to satisfy us. Maybe it's these ordinary things. And I think that Tolkien had a kind of a mastery of just combining the two. So when Sam gives this speech, I love the part, and this is the movie version that we gave because it's cool and there's this music and it's awesome. But in the book, he kind of mentions at one point just how these characters in the great stories, he used to think they went out looking for this danger, this adventure, these quests, but in reality, you kind of just find yourself there, and you didn't necessarily plan it. You're here, and this is what you have to work with. And do you if it's not this whatever you pictured it or want it to be, like it wasn't for Frodo and Sam at this point, do you lay down and quit, or do you do what Sam does and you say no, like we were gonna keep going. Um, and I just find it, I kind of relate to that in a way, just this kind of play between epic romance with, yeah, kind of just ordinary. I didn't choose this, but this is life and this is what I'm gonna live. So I don't know if that stuck, if anybody else maybe didn't have the same takeaways, but that's something that I really liked about. I feel like the movies as a whole, but I think this speech to me kind of it stuck out.
Yeah, I think another way to sort of succinctly describe the idea that you're presenting here is epicness will find you if you do your duty. Um, I'm reminded of a film, great film that y'all should definitely watch, called The Hidden Life. Has anyone seen that? It's out on Redbox right now. And the story of the film is certainly very, very similar to what Ross was just saying and the general concept that Sam puts forward here. And I'm not giving anything away by describing this, but it's a true story. Takes place in Austria during or just before World War II. And there's a guy who is, all of his townspeople, his neighbors are pledge allegiance to the Nazis because they're all conscripted and they have to pledge allegiance to the Nazis. And this drama plays out through the film is he going to be drafted? Is he going to be forced to pledge allegiance to Hitler, right? Um, and to kind of put a fine point on it, to kind of draw these ideas together, is that he was just like anyone else, sort of hoping, well, maybe it's going to be a moot point, right? Maybe the Nazis are not going to come to draft me, and it will be irrelevant, right? I can just sort of do my duty, and things will be well. Um, but of course, things don't work out that way, and the Nazis do come, and I'll leave it at that. But the movie is called A Hidden Life because of this quote by T.S. Eliot, which is presented at the end of the film, where something like half of the world's forces for good consist of not great dramatic forces, but by the people who lie in unvisited graves or something like that. And again, it just connects with this idea here that if we try to be more like Frodo and Sam or this guy from Within Life or all these other heroes we've talked about by doing our duty, then the epicness will sort of find us. And it will be more of an authentic, real expression of heroism rather than kind of trying to pick a fight, if that distinction sort of makes sense.
Yeah, I really like that. And actually, it's interesting in this time because like just an interesting experience I had. So like I work as a physical therapist. With the coronavirus, our clinic was closing, or not closing, but slowing down dramatically. And they told us that a lot of us were going to get reassigned to these new positions, right? So I kind of had this like initially I had this really glorious sort of view about what that might be. I'm going to be, in a tent in the pouring rain, taking nasal swabs on like this huge line of cars lined up to like, if then people are just sick all over the place.
Those
And
nasal swabs sound glorious.
yeah, well, no, I mean, but like this really dramatic scenario, right? So like the world's about to end, everyone's sick, and I'm just here trying to like do whatever I can, and like what it turned out to be was like, nope, I just ended up being like basically working as a CNA, like a nurse assistant in a hospital, and wiping butts and taking people to and from the bathroom and getting them a glass of water and all this like really mundane stuff that like sounds awful, but like means the world to these people. You know what I mean? Like,
Dr.
so,
Schultz, why are you trying to perform surgery on that woman?
exactly. Like yeah. I mean, it's the type of thing. Like, dang, I had this huge like epic vision about what would happen, but at the same time, like, shoot, like, I don't know. There's a lot of good that was done just in me, yeah, being available and present to people when they needed it. So.
So let me ask you this. It sounds like you had a good outlook on it. I feel like that's something I still struggle with a little bit, but maybe struggled with a lot out of college a little bit, kind of adjusting to, just a normal adult life. But I feel like that's something, I don't know, I think I don't want to, I mean, we are millennials, I guess, but a lot of people I know seem to kind of be looking for something. Um, so whether that's the great job or, it's popular right now to travel and have all these cool experiences. And it seems like not necessarily like we kind of mentioned the Marvel movies, the Lord of the Rings, I mean, Star Wars, these fantasy type things. It's like it's always a battle and war and let's beat the bad guy. But I think it again comes to life. You could also, you could put your name on whatever your mountain is that you want to climb, if that makes sense. But if, like most people know, right, life doesn't, you don't get to, you don't just get to pick exactly where you'll be in 10 years and 20. I mean, you can plan it and do your best, but things are going to happen and change, and you have to be able to kind of go with the flow. So when the mountain's not what you thought it would be, Schultz, that was a really, I guess, good example. I mean, Landon, Mike, have you guys ever experienced something like that? For me, I feel like it was kind of getting married, and I mean, just like anybody who ever has been married will tell you, yeah, there's kind of a honeymoon phase and then that kind of gets over and it's kind of, I mean, it's great. I don't want to speak badly about it at all, but it's all of a sudden it's regular, ordinary life. It's not, the honeymoon anymore. And just how do you be happy there?
Yeah, that you actually said the exact title of a book that I've read during our COVID lull here. Would highly recommend, called The Second Mountain by David Brooks. He is the conservative writer for the New York Times. So New York Times leans a little left of center, perhaps, and he provides the opposing view in that circle. Um, but he's a pretty accomplished journalist. And the concept that he laid out and talked at length about was, yeah, most of our society and education system and careerism and success is defined as, conquering the biggest mountain you can see in front of you. But so often you get to the top of that or halfway up it, and it's like, well, man, now I can see a lot of other mountains. And once I get to the top, will the view look any different? And um, what so the first one is usually more of an earthly material, predefined sort of um obvious success. And then when people understand perhaps the second calling, the second mountain, and reposition themselves, whether they find that right after college or at age 30 or at age 60, finding the thing that they can contribute. And most of the number one defining aspect of it is serving others. It's usually not glamorous. It's not that famous, or you don't make a ton of money at it. But there is like this, it's not happiness, but it's joy in knowing you've got um, a lot to do, a lot to work for. You might not be um, on the lake for 3 days every weekend in the summer. But you are contributing and applying yourself in a way that you're not even worried about perhaps getting to the top of the second mountain. So, really good book, highly recommend, and addresses some of those points you had just discussed.
Yeah, so I can't necessarily put my finger on any particular point in my life where I really um got this idea, Ross, but I mean, I can still definitely identify with it, and I can definitely sense a greater devotion to this idea since college as I gain appreciation and just get better and better at realizing that um yeah, well, here's here's something I was thinking about today while running, or yesterday. A line from Rocky. Sorry to throw Rocky back in here, but Rocky 2. But Mick, he says to I don't think I can do a impersonation, but he says to be a good fighter or to fight 40 minutes, you have to train for 40,000 minutes. And I think it's the exact same idea here, but expressed in a different way. That's to have 40 great minutes of your life where you rise to the occasion. You need 40,000 minutes of consistency in the small things there. So
Yeah, and that's why I read somewhere, I don't remember if this was Tolkien himself or someone commenting on The Lord of the Rings, but it talked about how Sam is really maybe the hero of the books in a lot of ways because he exemplifies this so well. You've got this ordinary guy. He's literally his job was a gardener for someone else. He says Master Frodo like type. He's kind of the in a way not servant, but he's not top of the food chain by any stretch of the imagination. Um, and he's a hobbit. He's small. He lives this ordinary life. He gets nervous around the girl that he likes, and yet he's the one. He goes with Frodo, and he's had the unglorious job, right? Frodo's the one that's carrying the ring, and yet Sam's the one that just won't give up and won't leave his side, even though he's not the one that's going to get the credit for it. And then in this moment, he's the one that says no, we have to keep going, and um, so I think that really to me that's kind of what I thought of just like this basic ordinary guy in a way saving the day just by you know like you said earlier just doing his duty. That was what he was there to do. He was going to be with Frodo and he wasn't going to let anything stop him.
So getting back to the speech, the text, um, pretty simple and powerful words. My mind went a couple places during it. What what's going on here? What's the context? Like, especially like we shouldn't be here full of darkness. How is the end result going to be happy? Um, like what's the despair that they're in and what's so hard about getting out of it? Clearly from the guy who hasn't seen the movies.
Glad you asked. All right. So, I guess general outline of the plot of the movie, which I think is warranted. Um, Frodo's uncle, Bilbo, inherits or has this ring and gives it to Frodo as he kind of disappears. It's a very mysterious thing. Frodo doesn't really understand it. Eventually, Gandalf comes and kind of guides him and tells him the importance of the ring and whatnot. So this kind of meeting of a bunch of people, a bunch of really important, impressive people. So Aragorn, who's been mentioned already, is one of them. A few of these elf people and crap. What's Gimli? What's he again?
That'd be a dwarf.
A dwarf. That's right, the dwarfs. I was gonna say the trolls, but I knew that wasn't right. So all these kind of ancient peoples, if you want to call them that, um, come together and they decide on a plan to basically destroy the ring so that this evil can stop kind of growing and festering in the world of Middle Earth. And their plan involves Frodo, of all people, to take the ring into this mountain and destroy it. Right. So that's their journey, is to destroy the ring of power that all of these evil people are basically trying to murder everyone to acquire. Right. So Sam joins Frodo on this journey, and like Ross says, doesn't leave him by his side, sticks with him. And they had just completed a particularly grueling part of their journey. Like I mentioned earlier, part of the power of the ring is that it kind of possesses and weighs down the person carrying it. And it makes the person in possession of the ring kind of focused only on keeping the ring for themselves.
Kind of like a Harry Potter Horcrux.
Maybe. I only got to book 4, and that was in like the 4th grade. All right.
Yeah, Horcrux didn't come until book 6.
Bummer. Dang, Horcruxes. All right, but so in this particular scene, or right before Sam makes the speech, Frodo was getting weaker and weaker from carrying the ring, and he nearly gave himself up to these bad guys called the Ring Wraiths. There's this big like dragon-looking thing, whatever, or like a ghost-looking guy riding a dragon-looking thing. It's pretty intense. But he almost gives himself up to these ring wraiths. And Sam tackles him and keeps him from doing it. But because the ring of power has come over Frodo, he pulls his sword on Sam because it's part of the effect of the ring, right? This jealousy, this kind of trying to possess things for themselves. Eventually, Frodo comes to and realizes Sam is looking out for him and not trying to steal the ring. Sam realizes that Frodo is nearing the end of his strength, and that's when he realizes he needs to do something, say something to give his friend some hope as he was about to give himself up.
Good summary. Got it.
Yeah, so to kind of bring it all, I guess, to bring it all back together. So now, if Matt, good job. It's hard to describe 3 really long movies in 3 minutes, but you did good. So kind of a commonly quoted line from the first movie is Gandalf talking to Frodo, and Frodo says something to the effect of, I don't have it in front of me, but I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened. So he's just kind of, and it kind of he gets hit with a little bit of despair and a troubling time. And Gandalf responds, I'm going to try to remember it off my top of my head, something to the effect of, neither do all who live to see such times. All we have to do is, but I forget the quote. All we have to do is choose how to live the time that's given to us, sort of. So Gandalf pretty much is saying, like, yeah, you it sucks. You're here. It's awful. But like that doesn't matter. What matters is what you choose to do with your time. So Sam really lives up to this really well because he has an unglorious role. He's just the sidekick. He's not the hero. And yet, in a time when his master literally has turned on him and everything should say he needs to back off, he does his duty to the highest degree. And, it ends up, spoiler alert, they destroy the ring and everything's happy. So kind of just thinking about that, I think Sam lives up to Gandalf's wisdom really well. So again, just like I feel like in my life with kids and diapers and that type, I mean, you brush their teeth, you feed them, and just kind of in a similar like unglorious time. Just I feel like that was a good reminder for me to kind of raise it to the epicness of maybe what it is. Just to kind of like Matt's example of what he needs to do for his patients right now. So anyway, that's why I picked that speech from a a series that I really like.
Very nice. Very nice. Are we to final thoughts if we went around the horn and did everyone's whatever it may be? You've got a note that wasn't covered from a comment 20 minutes ago and call it there.
One story I thought of, and this is an old guy I know named Lou, who has Parkinson's disease, and it's advancing pretty rapidly. And at one point, we were having a conversation about what his long-term goals are. So I'm kind of helping him. Helping him outside of the clinic, kind of just is it not a formal patient, I suppose, but just doing some physical therapy stuff, just trying to keep him as strong as I can. And I ask him like what his goal is, and eventually throughout this conversation, he said his goal was to stay strong enough to die at home, which was like, I don't know. I guess that kind of reminded me of this speech in that, um, there's a lot of darkness in his life, right? And, by rights, we shouldn't even be here, something Sam says. Like, he didn't do anything to deserve Parkinson's. There's all this darkness, but like, there's this kind of this subtle goal that's like really important to him. And that's like his new vocation. That's his new calling. And, I don't know, just like, kind of a cool story that like a speech like this, like how it might manifest itself in another person's life. So here's to Lou.
To Lou.
To Lou.
It's there's no word
Ross
in
doesn't
there.
care about Lou.
To Lou, I love you, Lou.
My final thought, again, reading it here, seeing it heard aloud, simple speech, not a ton of big words. It's almost, we've had a weird 10, 12, 14 days in America, and it's almost like Uncle Sam coaching along the Frodo freedom of America. Like, it's been some weird, dark times. Like, a lot of ugly things from our past are popping up. And gosh, you spend too much time on Twitter reading the news, or kind of the echo chamber of all the fighting going back and forth. This is a couple interesting quotes and lines for the future sun shining and getting out of some clear areas of cultural politics and just some bad, unfortunate things happening. So I think it is perhaps too fitting for the last couple weeks, and that hasn't been mentioned yet.
A cool line that I always liked from the Batman movies, the good ones with Christian Bale, not the weird ones. He's fighting Liam Neeson, Ra's al Ghul, I think is his name. And Ra's al Ghul, like the bad guys, literally are going to destroy Gotham because it's so bad. And Sam's comment, because there's good in this world and it's worth fighting for. Batman's comment is pretty much, I forget what he says, pretty much Gotham's not beyond saving. And I just think that's kind of an interesting idea. Like when people kind of in that movie, they've given up on Gotham, Frodo's given up, maybe Meryl's, whoever's given up, like just the idea, like it's still worth fighting for.
All right, that is Lord of the Rings. Big speech. See you next time.